So for those of you who haven't met me, I'm Karen Reish at the Library of Michigan. I manage our federal funds, and as a subset of that, I am the subgrant department. So I kind of do subgrants from start to finish. So if you have any specific questions or more general questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always available for questions. One thing I am going to start out with this is all the ideas that are out there about how to have engaging presentations that bring your audience into it. The application webinar is kind of not any of those. It's a very quick run through of what the expectations are for submitting an application, with some detail on the literacy focus and the digital inclusion focus. If you are interested in the special collections and historic preservation, later on this afternoon at 3, Biz Gallo will be going into details about the standards for the special collections and historic preservation. That is different enough in terms of standards you need to meet and such that that is actually a separate application packet, and Biz will explain that stuff in more detail. So let me get started with some screen sharing. This is the LSTA Improving Access to Collections Grant. This is our application webinar for our 2024 program, meaning you are going to apply this year, and then you are going to, if your grant is approved, you will actually do the grant in 2025. Our grant dates are October 1st, 2024 through September 30th, 2025. So first things first, it is a competitive grant. There's a limited number of proposals that will be accepted. Right now, I have budgeted about $350,000 for next year. So at $5,000 to $25,000, I should be able to fund a good number of them, but we have ranged between funding 25 to about 60%. So it's a good odds for you, but do be aware this is not going to be something where we're going to accept the majority of them like we do with a Summer Quick Grant. So they are available only if the Institute of Museum and Library Services receives a federal appropriation and is able to allot funds to us. One reason we say this is federal funds do not encumber across fiscal years for us. So even if I have money left over in this year's, I can't put that to next year's. And we actually do not have an allotment letter yet from the Institute of Museum and Library Services for next year, but we are expecting it any day now that the last of the budget bills have passed Congress. So first thing you want to know is, where's the documentation? What am I talking about? What do you need to read? I do want you guys to read it very thoroughly. I highly recommend that. The documentation is at michigan.gov/LSTA in the Improving Access to Grant section. There is an application packet for literacy and digital inclusion and an application packet for the local history. There's also the grant administration manual if you want to get an idea what you're going to be in for. You can check that. And there's also the program timeline. So any questions so far? Has anyone actually taken a look at the documentation yet? Nobody, no questions. Gotcha. Oh, you guys have looked at the documentation already. Yay, happy about that. There's some other things to look at when you're on the webpage for the Improving Access to Grants section. Towards the bottom, and I'll show you this, I'll show you the entire webpage. There is some information about crediting IMLS and the Library of Michigan in LSTA funded grants. This is a federal requirement. So if you are approved, I will do some light spot checking. And if you send me anything that you would have given out to the public and it doesn't have IMLS's credit on it, I will send you the polite, you should be including the IMLS credit message. There's some information on outcome-based evaluations. An evaluation is a required part of the grant. So that gives you an idea of the type of things IMLS is looking for, and that's helpful for us when we report back to IMLS. There's information on indirect costs. Indirect costs are an allowable cost for this program. I highly recommend you request them because I cannot go back and backfill into your budget later if you have not asked for indirect costs. But I will talk about those a little bit later. I highly recommend doing them if you have not already hit the grant maximum amount with project costs. There is an activity statistics guide. I need you to keep track of particular statistics depending on what you're doing, because I need to put those in the reports to IMLS at the end of your grant. So I've got a statistics guide for you. There's a reimbursement request checklist if you get a grant from us. And I highly recommend reading that one too, because it will give you an idea what kind of paperwork you need to keep track of for payments. And if you are approved and you don't send me the correct paperwork, I will send you an email telling you that I need something more. So, and then there are some specific evaluation questions if you do programming for the public. And we've got those listed off for you too. So that information is available on the webpage. So who's eligible? You can be a Michigan Public Library, academic library, or a library cooperative to apply for this grant. You must be eligible at the time of application and at the time of contracting. So I will do an eligibility check for both of those, and you will be notified immediately if there's a problem. So to be eligible, if you're an academic library or a public library, you must meet all of the criteria on this page. You have to have paid library staff. You have to have a regular schedule of services, a dedicated facility, an annual budget with funds reserved for materials and services, a record of multi-type library cooperation, meaning something like interlibrary loan. If you are a public library, you have to, whoops, going the wrong way. You have to be lawfully established and currently eligible for state aid. If you're an academic library, you must be a public or nonprofit college or university currently accredited by the Higher Learning Commission. So all that said, you can, if you're a library system, you can apply on behalf of your entire system. You can apply for something that you might do in certain of your branches, or something you might do in an individual branch. However, the applicant is the overall library, not the branches. You need to know who your fiscal agent is for the grant as well. Your fiscal agent frequently is not the library. So it is whoever accepts funds for you, pays your bills. It kind of depends on your library establishment type if you are if you can accept your own funds or not. So be aware you may have to include city or township fiscal staff. So what are our priorities? Our priorities are to improve access to services information in the areas of literacy, in the areas of local history, special collections, and to improve access for community users with limited online access, i.e. improving equity through digital inclusion. You must focus on one of these three areas, and you also must focus on improving access over purchased items. We have gotten questions in the past where folks are like, can I improve this collection? Can I buy this type of equipment? You can, in support of improving access. If your proposal is essentially a Field of Dreams version, if I have more materials, more people will use it, therefore it's improving access, that's not focused enough for the program. What you do with the grant must primarily be improving access for a specified population, and then the purchases you make support that improving access. So some broader guidelines for literacy. We're interested in projects that improve participant or user literacy for a range of topics. It can be early literacy, financial, digital, media literacy. I have learned in K-12 that those are considered different things, so I put them in there as different things. ESL is another option, adult literacy, health literacy. I saw some nice projects at PLA last week that related to health literacy. So we put some examples in there supporting ESL programming for farm workers or new Americans, media literacy programming for students, financial or digital literacy training for underserved groups. These are ideas only. You know your community better than anyone, so you may want to do something not quite like one of these examples, or you may have a different idea entirely, and you're welcome to contact me to talk about them. For digital inclusion, we're looking at things that are going to improve access for users who have limited access to the internet or knowledge of devices or online resources. So you could do a hotspot or laptop lending program. You could do tech training programs focused on information access. You could do assistive devices for people who have disabilities that would then help them use your collections better. And you would provide some training and outreach on the library having those. And then finally, for special collections, we're looking at projects that engage your local community in the collection, documentation, and preservation of their local histories, experiences, or identities. Biz will go into this a lot more this afternoon, but we're looking at things like preservation and promotion of an existing collection, perhaps collaborating with a local museum to do a themed collection, remediating metadata for something that may have already been digitized in your library so that you can then include it in the Digital Public Library of America. We are not looking at straightforward digitization projects that don't interact with your community, like purchasing collections. The focus is far more heavily on improving access and less on, I want to digitize this specific item, I want to buy this specific item. So do those priorities and guidelines make sense before I keep going? Okay, cool. So a note on digitization proposals. There is quite a bit of detailed information in the application packet on the expectations. You will need to address all of those expectations in your proposal. We've had a couple people who have submitted proposals. They've done all the work of the full application, and then they said, well, parts of these expectations don't apply to us. And if it seems like that's the correct answer to you, do reach out to Biz and I and make sure that that's something we would accept, because to date, that has not been something we've expected. If you don't have this expertise at your institution, but you still want to do something with digitization, that doesn't mean you can't do the project, but it might mean this is something where you might hire a consultant, you might hire somebody to provide a service for you. So just know that there is a pretty high bar for the quality and standards for the digitization, and that's going to be this afternoon at 3 with Biz. Two specific things to think about, though, before I leave that for Biz later this afternoon, is if you are going to digitize versus doing preservation activities on physical items in your collection, for example, you do have to include a plan to provide the project content to the Michigan Hub for the Digital Public Library of America. And you must include documentation of copyright permission or that the materials are outside of copyright. A blanket statement that copyright does not apply or that you have copyright will not be acceptable. So there's also, we want to look at how IMLS is looking for grants, the things that they want to support. And we've looked back at their authorizing legislation for this. So we're not saying you have to have a specific service or program. We're leaving that open-ended. Like I said before, you guys know your communities. But IMLS does have a focus to improve or develop new services to target populations, such as people from diverse geographic, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds, individuals with disabilities, and individuals with limited functional literacy, limited English proficiency, or limited information literacy skills. We would expect that focus from the IMLS legislation to show up in your target audience. They may not be the only people that would use the service or material that you want to provide as part of a grant. Of course, you're going to include anyone who wants to participate in or use it in your library. But minimally, we would like to see a solid identification of a group in your community that does not have the service or access that you want to provide, and how you're going to provide outreach to them, if not programming. So we're going to look at this really closely. So if the things I've said don't match with the ideas of what you want to do, I highly recommend talking to me. If it's more on special collections, talking to Biz, and we'll see if this isn't something where we can take your idea and modify it so it fits the priorities and focus better. But if you sketch out your idea and you really can't see those 3 priorities and the focus IMLS has on targeted populations, then you really need to think further on your proposal. So any questions so far? Donna, you can apply to, let me back up. You can submit more than one application. You may end up competing against yourself. You cannot submit more than one application for the same project. Like, we're going to submit an application for one facet of it and an application for a second facet. It is one project, one application. So if you think you can swing 2 projects next year, and you're willing to do the work to submit to, you are welcome to do that. I would be inclined to say put your focus on one and then save the rest for a second year, but that is indeed up to you. So you do not need partners for this grant. The collaborative grant that we used to run, we did require partners. For this one, we don't. However, if you do have a partner, if in your proposal you say you're going to work with a local historical museum, or you're going to work with the local elementary school, we're going to expect to see some documentation of that then in your proposal. So a partner is somebody who's going to bring resources, staff time, local funding. They're going to participate in training and participate in outreach. That would be a partner. Letters of support that say it's great, they're going to offer this new service for students who have limited English proficiency, the school supports it. That's not a partner, that's a letter of support. You're welcome to include that in your grant appendices, but we would not consider them a partner because they're not actively working with you. If you do have someone that is actively working with you, we do recommend that you do an MOU between you and that institution, so it's very clear to both of you who is agreeing to do what. You do not need to provide an MOU for the application, but you do need to provide a letter from the partner saying, we understand this grant is being submitted, and we understand we have agreed to do these activities if the grant is funded. So who's a partner? A community organization or library that you're not in a contractual or membership relation, whose mission relates to your current library services. So a museum would work, a school would work, another library would work, but it can't be a vendor. If you're going to purchase something from a vendor and they're going to come in and do training, they're not a partner. They're a vendor providing you a service. If you're a library system, branch libraries are not partners to each other. They are part of the same institution. If you're a library cooperative, your member libraries are not partners because you have a contractual relationship with them. It does not mean they cannot participate in the grant, but we will not consider them partners. And if you are in an academic library, similar departments within the same college or university aren't partners because they are part of the same institution. So I'll jump in here with things that we will not fund. We're not going to fund standard library operations. We won't supplant local funds or staffing, and we cannot fund capital expenditures. Some federal funds do cover capital expenditures. The Institute of Museum and Library Services authorizing legislation specifically precludes capital expenditures. So there is no construction whatsoever, even if you need to do construction to use materials you purchased through the grant. So that would be a local cost. Do keep that in mind. So what did we mean by standard library operations? If you're going to do basic collection development, you're going to do an automation project, you want to cover the cost of a staff member while they're working with a partner that's not related to the focus of the grant. If you want to do equipment replacement, hi, my computer lab is getting a little old. We want to replace the laptops, and you don't really have a digital literacy or digital inclusion focus beyond that. We won't grant those. We're going to consider that standard library operations. Also, upgrades to collections or equipments that are new to your organization but are not integral to the grant activities are also considered standard library operations. So, for example, you want to do a program where you would be bringing more people into the library and you're like, and we really need more tables and chairs to accommodate the expected increase. Your furniture is considered operational expenditures. We wouldn't approve that. So what do we mean when we say supplanting versus supplementing? Um, a way to understand the difference between those two things is, are the activities and materials already in your budget and you're swapping in grant funds for those costs? That's supplanting local funds, and that's against federal regulation. If the activities are new, whether it's your staff time, the items you want to purchase, the services you want to pay for, that's supplementing, and that's okay. That may sound a little bit like hair splitting, but essentially, if you're trying to develop something new and you need support while you get it off the ground, that's supplementing. But if you say, we have some budget cutbacks this year, maybe I can use the grant to keep my summer reading going, that would be supplanting. And I'm just double checking chat. Academic libraries can provide letters of support. I don't have a template to show you right away for an MOU, but that's certainly something you can contact me about, and I can make some suggestions. Donna also asks, we have a contractual agreement with another municipality for library services, and we're partnering with their rec center. They're not the municipality that your library is part of, is what I'm understanding from that question. So I would say yes, that's a partner. So a little more detail on the capital expenditures, construction or renovation for buildings or vehicles are not allowed under our legislation. So even if you do need them to support your program, having it be adjacent to the grant activities still does not make them allowable, unfortunately. So do those three things that we can't fund make sense to everybody? Cool. Okay, so the basic timeline, it's for 1 year. It's from October through September. The minimum is $5,000. The maximum is $25,000. We provide funding on a reimbursement basis only. Reimbursement requests are required at least quarterly. I do that to kind of keep us on track so paperwork doesn't get lost. I have an idea how well your grant is going. If we're 6 months through your grant and you haven't spent any money yet, I would like to know that so I can call up and go, is there something going wrong that we can help you with? Some costs are not allowable for LSTA, and these in general are all federal funds. You cannot lobby with it. You cannot do general advertising of library services. You can put out a flyer or a Facebook post that you use grant funds to promote that says, we have this new service in our library funded by this IMLS grant. Come take a look at our new assisted devices. That's absolutely fine. What you can't say is, the library has great stuff. Come in and take a look. We can't fund salary, supplies, service, or materials that aren't integral and directly in support of the grant. And finally, there is a tech ban for the use of federal funds. It's not easy to tell without going into sam.gov and searching for the company and seeing if they have an exclusion. But Typically, what they're covering with this is computers, internet equipment, security cameras. Uh, there are a handful of Chinese companies, and then if they have produced materials that are being sold under different brands in the US, you cannot use federal funds to buy them. If you are thinking, I'm going to buy Chromebooks or I'm going to buy some Dell laptops, you're probably fine. I wouldn't really worry about it. However, if you get a great deal on something and you don't recognize the manufacturer's name, it would be a good idea to double check sam.gov. I'm not going to double check you on this, but it is something an auditor may check. And Angela makes a comment about hotspots. You can do a hotspot lending program with the grant. We would like to see a lot of outreach to specifically identified groups in the community that you would use that for, but that's certainly an acceptable purchase for that. And finally, the allowability of food and furnishings are problematic, and we recommend you don't plan on providing them through LSTA funds. There are occasions when they are allowable, they're limited. So if you're, whatever you're thinking of, if you're like, I just can't possibly do this without using grant funds for furnishings or food, talk to me before you spend a lot of time on the grant proposal. So our timeline, the application opened in February. We're doing our webinars right now. The application is due May 31st at 5 p.m. That is a hard deadline. If you have not submitted a complete application by that date, you will not be considered. I review eligibility and get all the paperwork in order in June. Peer reviewers go through the proposals in July, and we do award announcement letters and grant award notices. Outside of the Department of Education, you would call this a contract. We will do those in August. And we will notify everyone of the results when we do the contracts. We notify people who were not approved at the same time as we notify people who were approved. We'll do a grant administration training in September, and then you start on your grant on October 1st. Your expenditures need to be complete by August 31st, and you have quarterly interim reports due the last business day of each quarter. They're not super long. It's, give me a half a page or so and tell me where you're at with your project. And we have quarterly reimbursement requests due. The end of December, March, June, and then the last one is not quite quarterly. It is 2 weeks after the end of the expenditure period, which is the last business day of August. I have that set up like that. So if there are any problems with documentation, if you don't have everything yet from a vendor, we have time to correct documentation errors before the state closes their fiscal year books. And the state closes their fiscal year books very quickly. By mid-October, I will no longer be able to expend funds. So we're trying to give ourselves and you time to correct anything before we can't reimburse you. You will have a final report due last business day of October. That's anywhere from 6 to 8 pages. It's a recap of what you wanted to do in your proposal and how well it went. So does that make sense so far? I don't see any hands up. Christina says I'm doing good. Great. So the application is open now. It's at michigan.gov/LSTA in the Improving Access to Grants section. I'll show you that. So what are the required elements of the application? I've been telling you I can't spend money on this, I can't spend money on that, and these are the priorities. So when you put a pencil to the paper or fingers to the keyboard, you're going to need to submit the online application, partner statements from all listed partners, if you have any, the grant application signature sheets, both SIPA and the board assurances. They have to be complete. You have to fill out the SIPA regardless of your project. You either fill it out to say it doesn't apply to my project or it does, and I will follow those guidelines. If you think SIPA doesn't apply to you, don't skip that piece of paper. You have to confirm to me either positively you are going to follow SIPA or negatively that you don't need to because the project doesn't apply, but you can't just not give it to me. In the board assurances, I'll say this a couple times in this presentation, they need to be fully signed. They have to be signed by the people who hold those positions. I had somebody who signed for their director because their director was on vacation and I did not accept their grant. But people accidentally upload the unsigned version of that sheet. Double check that you're uploading the correct version because if you submit at the last minute and that's not signed, your grant will not be reviewed. You have to include the budget spreadsheet, and if you are doing a digitization project, you have to include the copyright assessment spreadsheet. So 2 through 5 are attachments that you put in number 1. So everything will be submitted online. The board assurances are your signatures for the contract. That's one of the reasons we are strict about them having them signed. And they are also your acknowledgement that you understand that it's federal funds and how federal funds can be used. So we will immediately decline your grant if those are not fully and completely signed. That said, if you submit by Wednesday at noon of the week they're due, I will double check because the deadline has not been reached yet. I will double check and make sure your attachments are correct. And if they are not correct, it will give you a chance to fix them before the Friday 5 p.m. deadline. If you submit on Friday and they're not correct, we don't have time for you to go back to a board member. So at that point, what you submit is what you submit. So do double check. In that online application, we're going to ask you some basic stuff about your project, about you, about the administration, some basic information on your partners, and then the proposal. The proposal is where you're going to explain what you want to do, why you think your community needs it, how you identified who in your community needs it, what you're going to do, what's your project plan and your timeline, how you're going to evaluate how successful you were, and how you're going to sustain it. There's also some just quick checkbox things. You need to identify a state goal that it matches, a federal LSTA intent and subject, and a target population. Those are checkboxes, and they're nothing to angst over. You're just picking what fits best. If your proposal doesn't seem quite on target for one of those, we're just asking you to pick the things that fit the best. And then your budget. Your budget also you should put quite a bit of thought into. That's your financial plan. So the additional documents, as I mentioned, you're going to attach those, the SIPA, the resolutions, the partner statements, and the budget. So applicant information, your name. If you have a common name versus a legal name, please use your legal name because that's going to match better for me. What type of library you are, the checklist for your eligibility, your director and contact, your legislative districts. You must have a UEI number. If you do not have a UEI number right now, when you get off the application, start the process for getting one because I cannot distribute federal funds to someone without a UEI number. You do not have to have an active registration with the feds, but you do have to have a number assigned. Project administration, confirm who your director is. The grant administrator is the person who will manage the grant activities day to day. The fiscal agent, that must be part of your organization. It might not be in the library. It might be a township treasurer or a city treasurer, but it cannot be, say, your friends group or a partner. It must be within your organization. And then authorized official. This is the person who can sign a contract for your library. It's a legal standard, and it's typically the board chair or the library director. If it is not, if you're expecting to have someone other than the board chair or library director, say, you've got an IT director who's going to sign for it because they can sign contracts. They have to have formal authority. The board has to have done a formal approval for that person to sign contracts. If it is the same person for more than one of those positions, say you're the library director, you are also the authorized official. Sometimes the director is not the authorized official, which is why I say that. Don't skip the lines that apply to you. So sign each one and date each one. That way we know that you are each of those people on the signature sheet. The project information, we'd like a title, how much money do you want? Do you have cash match? Cash match is not required, but it is a good way to indicate to your peer reviewers that you understand, you're doing something that's going to take a lot of staff time. You're going to provide some local funding as well, because it's really a $35,000 project and you can only ask for 25. That helps your peer reviewers understand you understand the totality of the project. And your start and end dates that you think you can do, just to give me an idea if they don't quite match up with the grant contract dates. Then there's the proposal. So that first part's pretty simple. You're just typing in the name of your library, the name of the individuals involved. If you have applied for anything before in the Library of Michigan grant system, it's going to populate that stuff for you too. So it'll make it a little bit easier. When you get to the project proposal, this is the meat of your plan. It should be about 10 pages. If you can do it very briefly in 3 or 4 sentences, but it doesn't really explain how you're going to do it, you might want to expand on it. It is not an essay. We tend to see sometimes applications that I call library services wholly. That doesn't really explain why you want that particular service, who are the people that are going to need it, and how you're going to accomplish making that information more accessible to them. The questions in the proposal are different. Sometimes I get pretty repetitive answers. We feel they are very different questions. So if you find yourself repeating your answers, give me a call and talk to me about what I meant with those questions so you don't miss the opportunity to explain your proposal better. We are asking you to be very concise and to be very specific. That will help you stand out against other proposals, and it'll make it very clear that you understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. I do have an acronym at the bottom that I kind of liked from a grant training I went 2 years ago. Research what you want to do, engage who you may need as partners, apply how you're going to accomplish it, and then explain to us how you're going to deliver those expected outcomes. Your abstract will be published publicly, 160 words, no jargon. If your grandma doesn't understand what you said in the abstract, rewrite it. We want this to be your project in a nutshell, the literal elevator speech. If you were with your city manager or your legislator and were trying to convince them and you had 30 seconds before the elevator door opened, just that 160 words, tell them what you want to do. You've got 1 page for project purpose. You've got 1 page for a target population need. You've got 1 page for the impact. This is how you expect using the service or using the improved access is going to help that target population. Project design, you have 3 pages. The local history proposals, you can go up to 5 because you may need to give us some detail there. That project design section, that's your plan. That's where you're saying, I'm going to do this first. I'm going to do this second. I'm going to need to survey the public to see who can participate at what times. You're going to be very detailed there. You're going to have an evaluation plan. It would be very helpful if the evaluation plan included steps during the project as well as at the end. If you don't evaluate anything you're doing until the end, you're missing an opportunity to perhaps do course correction and make the project more impactful. We do like to see sustainability. Um, we do get grants where people say, um, we hope we can find another funder at the end of these funds. Sometimes that's the best answer you can give, but we would really like to see that your board or your municipality um, thinks the project is important enough to continue it after the grant funds are over. We want a timeline as well. That is, again, that's going to be a very practical, very focused part. And then personnel. You don't need to provide resumes unless you particularly want to, but we do want to know who's working on it and briefly what are their qualifications. So does that make sense so far? I'm kind of looking at my time here. Nobody's speaking up, so I think I'm doing good. Um, the proposal section is reviewed by the LST Advisory Council, those members who opt to do grant reviewing. It is looked at by peer reviewers, people who volunteer to be the ones who read your proposals and score them, and by Library of Michigan staff. So that's who will take a look at it. So OBE, I'm going to bring that up, outcome-based evaluation. That is IMLS's preferred method of evaluation. And this isn't something that always makes sense to libraries. What we're looking for are outcomes, not outputs. An output is how many items circulated that you purchased for the grant, how many people showed up to your digital literacy drop-in hours. Those are your outputs. Your outcome is, did the people who came to your digital literacy drop-in hours learn how to use their devices better? When they left, if they did a brief survey for you, did they say, yes, I now understand how to use my device. Yes, I'll use library e-content more often. If it's a literacy project with children, after your parents participate, are they going to read with their children more often? So you're necessarily going to have outputs to your activities, but also look at outcomes. And those are things where either your staff is going to have to do some tracking of how people act when they're using these materials or participating in these programs, or you do an actual short survey to the people who participate so you have an idea if you changed anything about their knowledge or their attitudes or their actions. So just beware. IMLS has an actual definition there. They're looking at changing or improving people's skills, attitudes, knowledges, behaviors, etc. There is some links on the webpage about it. There is an IMLS OBE site that you might want to click through. And then those required evaluation questions I mentioned earlier, they are included if you are purchasing content for library staff or the public, if you're training library staff or if you're training the public. And this is full-on training, not a handout you would give somebody they would read in their own time, or passive participation. So if you do something that has actual training, you will need to do some evaluation questions with that. Sustainability is not always just about funding. So if you look at the sustainability model and you're like, well, it's nice she wants me to write about sustainability, but if I had this money in my budget, I wouldn't be asking for the grant to begin with. But you can also look at it as outcomes and activities. Once you train your staff on providing a new service, are you going to be able to continue to onboard new staff after the grant is over? Are you going to continue to be able to absorb the circulation level and replacement parts and such in your day-to-day budget? So think about that, not just, are you going to find another $25,000 a year afterwards, but are you going to make time for your staff to continue these activities? So you might look at staff changes, you might look at reorganization of duties. Will your partner keep working with you? So there are things other than, we all want a magic wand where we can make our budgets bigger. For your partners, we're looking for some basic information, who they are, who their contact person is. In a partner statement, I'm looking for one page on the letterhead of the partner that says, we understand this grant is happening. This is what we're going to do to help support it. If you do want some MOU examples, send me an email and then I can send something out to everyone. The application checklists, like I said before, they're very, very quick, very brief to go through. Then we get to your other big thing. This is your budget. It needs to be the same amount between the amount you requested at the beginning of the project information. Your budget needs to add up to the same thing. There is an Excel sheet on the website. That's what you need to fill out. I don't want a local form. I want that specific form on the website. And it does have space for you to include narrative explanations. So I don't want to see, we're going to have 100 hours of staff time at this amount. I want to see, we're going to have 100 hours of staff time at this amount, and we think it will be 5 hours a week with the youth librarian doing these types of activities, and an hour a week of our IT staff making sure hotspots that are returned are ready to go back out again. We want to know how you came up with the money that you're putting in the budget. There are some notes on the budget. I'm going to go through the budget in a lot more detail in a budget webinar later this month because we do see some issues with budgets that we're hoping to head off the pass with some further training this year. But it needs to be allowable. There are things that you purchase every day in your library that aren't acceptable with federal funds. It needs to be unlockable. I've never heard of this word outside of federal funds, but essentially it is, if you get a great deal and you buy 10 hotspots, you get a discount and you're really only going to use 8 of those for the program, you can only charge 8 of them to the grant then. This is one of the reasons why we don't allow office supplies. If you say, well, I'm going to print stuff for the evaluations, so I'm going to add copier paper, but how much of that copier paper did you use for the grant? They actually care about these things. And necessary. If you're looking at your project and you're going, well, it would be really nice if we had this too, and it is tangentially related, so we'll add that to the budget. Do you absolutely have to have that item or that service to do your grant project? If the answer is no, it kind of looks like you're throwing the kitchen sink into your basket. We've seen library applications where they're like, well, we want to do this kind of program with kids. And oh, by the way, a homework helper database will be great too. So we're going to add that. But it wasn't really necessary for the grant. So this was my more detail on each of these. It must be for an allowable cost. There is a section in the grant packet on allowable costs. If you do purchase something that is not allowable, I cannot reimburse you. I do go through your receipts. So be cautious about that because you will be responsible for costs that are disallowed. That's my explanation for allocable again. That's why we also don't like office furnishings and supplies. And then again, necessary. So what can you ask for money for in this budget? You can ask for salaries, wages, and benefits. You can ask for consultant fees, travel, supplies and materials, equipment, services, and indirect. So you can basically cover all of your costs up to that $25,000 maximum. When you do your budget, do you include descriptions of specific items or activities? If you list match funds, be aware that matching funds are held to the same cost standards as federal funds. That's one of the reasons I don't require them. I think that's a hard barrier for libraries. So I don't have to ask you for match funds, so I don't. It might help the peer reviewers understand that you grasp the entirety of the project, but I'm not going to require that. And finally, your proposal activities need to match the budget items. So what you talked about in the project description, I should see things in the budget that match. And I should also see things in the project description that you've listed in your budget. They should go hand in hand. So before I move on to that rest of the documentation, did my budget comments make sense? All right, I'm going to keep going then. So SIPA, you can say that you are a school, a public library, or a consortia, and you have two options. You will comply per the requirements of the LSTA Act, or the LSTA Act does not apply because you are not using funds for internet access or equipment, or you're not an applicable library. This is where academics would fall. You're not an applicable library. If you are doing something with partners and say the rec center question from earlier, and people would use digital devices with internet access at the rec center, that does not exclude you from filtering. So if you purchased either the data access plan or the devices with federal funds, they must be filtered no matter where they are used. The board certifications, they are there to confirm that you have the legal authority to apply, that you will comply with federal regulations, that you're going to supplement your budget, not supplant it, and that everything is truthful. You haven't been debarred, you're not going to use the money for lobbying, et cetera, et cetera. Everything must be original, everything must be dated, all 4 signature lines must be filled out. So how do we do our review? I review for completeness and eligibility. I will do that within a couple days of the submissions. Then proposals are scored using the rubric that's in the application packet by the advisory council members who decide to participate and volunteer peer reviewers. Randy Riley, our state librarian, will make the final decision on what gets selected. And then we will go through the process with the Department of Education to have it approved by the State Superintendent of Education. So if your proposal is approved, you will get a grant award notice signed by Dr. Rice. The application scoring rubric, read through that. If only when you're done writing your proposal to make sure that you see answers to the questions in the rubric in your proposal. If you get 0 to 60% of the possible points, your proposal won't be considered for funding. Donna asks, what defines an original signature for a digital application? That is a darn good question. It is not typed. They can use the Adobe Acrobat authenticated signature. They can physically sign a piece of paper that you then scan, but you can't type a name on it, if that makes sense. If you're working with board members who don't have the technical capacity for the Adobe Acrobat authorized signature, it's clunky, especially in 2024, but you can have them sign the piece of paper and scan it. So for scoring, if you get 60 to 80 possible points, if we have money left after we look at the ones that got higher points, we'll consider it. And if you get 80 to 100 points, 81 to 100 points, then your grant will be discussed by the peer reviewers and considered. And this is going to be an average. Your proposal is going to go to a group of people within the whole review committee. So we are going to average all of their scores. So if someone didn't like your grant or didn't understand it, that hopefully won't be an issue with tanking how your score goes. I try and give each grant 5 to 6 reviewers. And that usually works out pretty well. I'm not going to go through this now because I'm running out of my time. I'm going to probably go about 15 minutes over. So if anyone needs to leave, please feel free. But these are the questions. They are in the application packet. We will be complete with reviewing in July. I will make the award announcements in August. And you should have a letter either saying we're so sorry, but we were unable to fund it, or we're funding you and here is your grant award notice in August. So if you don't hear from me, reach out. That might mean something has gone wrong. And perhaps I've been trying to reach you out and using the wrong email address. I do a disclaimer. Library of Michigan subgrant process is competitive. So if you talk to me about a proposal and I go, wow, that sounds like a great idea, um, and we get 100 applications and other people had better ideas per the peer reviewers, that may mean that you wouldn't be funded. On the other hand, you never know. We might get 5 proposals and your idea will look sterling compared to them. So a last tidbit here, if you receive funding, the grant administrator and fiscal agent must attend the grant administration meeting. I do them virtually, but most of the problems that grantees have in terms of managing their grants are addressed in that grant administration meeting. So make sure to take time for that if you're approved, and take time where you can have few distractions. And you will have a records retention period for 3 years after your grant is up. If you do receive funding and you get that letter in August and you're like, woohoo, I'm going to click order on Amazon, wait until your grant contract starts on October 1st. We can fund nothing that was ordered before October 1st. Do be aware that you do need to follow federal standards for purchasing. With this grant, that probably doesn't apply. They have stunningly larger thresholds for bidding than municipal governments, but do be aware of that. There is an audit requirement attached to this grant. If you've gotten a grant from me before, you have seen the single audit form. That is for total expenditures of any federal funds by your overall organization. I will send you the letter. You don't need to look for it. And you basically just need to make sure that your municipality knows your grant is included in a single audit if they have one. So, final reminder, if your proposal is late, if the SIPA form is unsigned or undated, if the board assurances are unsigned or undated, or if you have no UEI number or required attachment is missing, your grant will not be grant proposal will not be accepted. So like I say, you might want to shoot for that Wednesday at noon where I will double check all of those things for you and give you an opportunity to make corrections. So that is my proposal. So excuse me, my presentation. I can take a few minutes and show you the website and show you what the login looks like if you'd like. Nobody said no.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Gotcha. All righty. So let me screen share again. There we go. I think I did it right this time. Alrighty, so this is michigan.gov/LSTA. I throw that out there all the time for people. This is the basic information about our LSTA award. If you go down to the bottom, this is the library grant programs. I tell people michigan.gov/LSTA because that's the simpler address. Click on improving access to the grant program. Here's the background information for the grant program. This is the stuff we reviewed today. And then as you go down further, you can see the application webinars. I will be posting the recordings here as soon as they are captioned. My budget one will be April 23rd. And we'll put information up here about the administration webinars later. And then here are the forms you need. If you're going to do literacy or digital inclusion, this is the application packet that has everything you need. This is the one for local history or special collections. I have pulled out the program timeline, so that's a quick check for you. This is the current grant administration manual. This is the grant administration manual for the next year program. There's been some slight tweaks, but they're basically the same thing. When you submit, this is the SIPA form and the certification insurances forms. So I've made it all one piece of paper. So I've gone back and forth between two pieces of paper, 2 documents, and one. It seems to work better with one. So be aware, you need signatures in 2 places on this, and you need to put the name of your library at the top of the assurances. So you're going to fill out 3 pages of that document and upload it into the grant application. Here's your budget worksheet. And then if you are doing something that includes digitization, here's the rights assessment template. Once you get a grant, these say active grant forms. Those are forms that you'll use in managing your grant. So everything you need to both apply and to manage a grant is right here in forms and documents. So to apply, this opens an application for literacy and digital inclusion. This opens an application for local history or special collections. If you have started an application, do not come back and click on this again, because what will happen is you will open a new application with nothing in it. Once you have started an application and saved it, what you want to do is return to an application or submit a reimbursement or report. This is the same link to keep working on an application as it is to submit forms after your grant is approved. And finally, here are those other documents I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. So what does it look like when I'm going to just show you how it looks when you sign in. So I'm going to open an application. It does give you some information here, like add mail at grantapplication.com to your safe senders list. Please do that. I highly recommend it. This does explain what's under the application and the requirements tab. If you don't submit an application and it goes dormant for more than 4 months, it is deleted. That has snagged some people in the past, actually, who are really early. So this opens the application up for you because I already have a username and password. So I've already set that up. So this does look a little clunky. Blackbaud is supposed to be updating how this looks for you, but you have each of these are different sections, essentially pages. So this is your project information. These are your partners section. Here's your proposal. This is the majority of your application is this tab. And it's a bunch of text boxes. This goals, intents, and subjects. This is your check boxes for how you match Michigan's LSTA goal, the federal intent, etc. You attach your budget, your certifications, and appendices in this page. And I am going to just show you. I'm going to go down here. Sometimes people don't realize they haven't finished an upload. What you're going to do is browse, and I'm going to pick a document here because it's going to want a PDF. And then I'm going to wait for a couple of seconds. Okay, I do have to click upload. When you see that it's highlighted and clickable, then it is uploaded and is on the server. If you want to double check, oh my gosh, did I upload the right copy with all 4 signatures for my certifications? You can click on it and bring it back up and double check that is indeed what you wanted to upload. So you're going to browse, you're going to upload, and then wait a few seconds before you go off that page so that you know that the upload got to the server. And then finally, you're going to say, I certify that I had the authority to apply, et cetera, so on. Signer name, signer title, signature date. You'll click review and submit, and it's going to give me all sorts of red because I didn't fill anything out. So if this happened to you, perhaps not this much red, you could then correct it. And then when you don't have anything that's wrong, the option here won't be update, but you will have an option to submit. So once you have logged in once, this is what it looks like if you go to return to a saved application. You go to an account screen for yourself. Here are applications that you're working on, and you can just click into them to open them up again. You can delete it. You can transfer it to someone else. Say you're halfway through applying and you got a better job offer, you're leaving your library, and you're going to transfer the application to your colleague so they can complete it. This is shifting it off to their account. You can forward it to somebody and it will email a copy. So if you are working with a partner or you want to send a copy to your boss, here's as far as I am on the application. Do you want to take a look at it and see what you think? You can see stuff you've submitted if you do this drop down for submitted. And here are my many, many testings. And once you get a grant or a stipend, you will have a requirements tab. You won't see that if that's the first time you've used the system. But then when you need to submit something to me, new requirements will show up here. I don't actually have any. In progress requirements, if you've opened it at all, it's going to show up here and submitted. So you can always go back to your grant account and pull up previous submissions, both applications and requirements for previous grants, if you need them in the future for an auditor or you want to see what you did or something like that. So that's what that account looks like. If you have any trouble with it, call me up and yell at me. So that is my presentation for the application today. If you want to make, just give me a call or send me an email. If you have ideas you want to talk about, that would be great. If you want to talk to me at some length and want to send me some ideas and set up an appointment time, I'm happy to do that too. Like I say, I have a fair amount of money by my budget standards, at least, to give out next year. And I'm really looking forward to what we can spend the money on. Any questions?
Karen, I have a question. I'm curious if successful applications are anywhere, just, as someone new to this process, to be able to see examples of successful
Ab
applications.
Absolutely. We have brief descriptions of the current funded grants as a link on that grant page, but you want to see a full application. I think that would be most helpful. Um, Send me an email and say, this is what I'm looking at, and I can pick back through the applications and see if I can find one that is similar. So, it's better advice for you. These are foyable, so I feel no point in making you jump through that hoop. But I do like to ask the applicant first, someone has asked, just so you're aware, I'm going to give them a copy of your application. So they're not like, why did this person call me? And sometimes, even if I haven't done a grant for someone, I may know of someone who's done a similar project. And I freely throw those folks under the bus and say, oh, you should call them. They did that. It looked great.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, send me an email and I'll try and pick something that would give you the best information. Anybody else? Nobody. And everyone have a good afternoon, hopefully a dry one.